Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new IDD Talks issue. We are very excited with this new topic that I will introduce in a minute, as well as the guests that honored us with their presence and will give us a light during these dialogues. This IDD Talk subject is Roadmap for Digital Development in the Caribbean. And we have Grace Lindo. She's a Jamaican commercial, intellectual property, and tech lawyer. She's an expert on privacy data protection and intellectual property issues. Now I would like to introduce also Kevon Swift. His hometown is Trinidad and Tobago, and he has 12 years experience in international ICT affairs and digital policy. He's today in his personal capacities, but he's currently in LACNIC as head of strategic relations and integration. As commentators, we also have our IDD LAC director, Andres Piazza. And now I will give the floor to Kevon and Grace for their opening remarks about the challenges that the Caribbean region has to face. So the floor is yours, guys, and go ahead.
Right. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Sophia, and thank you for having me on this, this panel to discuss issues which affect the Caribbean, and thank you for focusing on the Caribbean. Several times we feel that we get left behind. So it's always good to have something specific to the Caribbean, so thank you for that. We need more. So generally, as you know, the Caribbean is going through a period of upheaval like everybody else in the world through COVID. And it has really shown us some issues that we have to address. I think the issues which we found to be paramount 5 years ago have changed with COVID. For me, I think connectivity is now number one because of all of those remote work, remote school, which comes to the fore at this time. And so connectivity and the technical issues, I think, are much more important than the access and rights issues and even data protection issues to an extent. Save and except for cybersecurity, which now is just as important as the technical issues. It is technical too. So COVID has changed the game. And I think when I look at our discussion points today, I think we have several notes to make in terms of areas for improvement and also areas for collaboration.
Okay, and I guess I will start there as well. So thanks again to you, Sophia. Thank you to Andres for having me here on this discussion for a topic that I find very interesting. In addition to what Grace said, the Caribbean is really at a true turning point in what would have been all of the talks before for digital transformation. So the pandemic has meant that we have accelerated a lot of the digital transformation plans that we spoke about, but at the same time, you would have seen a spate of what you would call pivoting strategies across both governmental agencies and the like, and the private sector. And as Grace has mentioned, connectivity is really coming to the fore because it really puts into perspective the whole question we look at when it comes to digital opportunity for Caribbean constituents. And the connectivity challenge, or the quality, or the, how could I call that? The sort of quality behind that connectivity that's really become apparent now when you think about what school children are facing to continue their education during this time. When you think about continuity for small businesses that are still grappling with understanding the nuts and bolts of setting up presences and continuing to conduct their business. That very much has really shot to the forefront at this time. And Grace also spoke about the cybersecurity, cybercrime factor. which for me, it's a topic that I hold very close to my heart. I was involved in Trinidad and Tobago for a number of years on its National Cybersecurity Committee. And from there, I had sight of what you would call other cybersecurity developments across the region. It's become somewhat imperative at this time, not only to think about modernizing our legislative frameworks to address cybercrime. So right now we have a hodgepodge of laws dealing with computer misuse, which are fashioned on the UK computer misuse law. You have some territories that have been looking at cyber crimes and the newer generation of crimes. And we have to do all of this while conducting these various digital transformation initiatives, while trying to understand that in modernizing cybercrime law, we have to think as well about cyber defense, the whole idea of this law as implemented. How are we going to really and realistically address the scope or the spate of things that could happen? Because within a short space of time, we have gone very digital very quickly, and we have also increased our cyber risk portfolio in that short space of time. So understanding the mechanisms to support all of these things, those things are really at the forefront at this point. And it's something that you would see persons like Grace and myself and others, we are observing and commenting and looking at where we can have inputs on these issues as they are being discussed at this current time.
Thanks very much, both Grace and Kevon. It has been a pleasure. It's being a pleasure. Our first English sort of session, and also our first Caribbean one on the same day. You both agreed on some of the challenges related to development. We were trying to make a cross-cutting, at least a panorama for the development agenda. Others, public policy and rights issues are also contributing to development because are very necessary. Cybersecurity and privacy and rights are also necessary for our goal. And our organization is, well, it was founded this year, 2021, and it's a new kind of organization that tries to find or to try to cover a gap between the different stakeholders, trying to recollect the common ground that has been built alongside the last 15 years of multi-stakeholder discussions, and trying to push a little bit harder for a new step in these agendas, trying to help those multi-stakeholder dialogues that were already being done and are already taking place to push a little bit more in order to achieve some goals in the regulatory and public policy landscape, more oriented to development as a goal, but not in a capacity of representatives of private sector or governments, neither technical community or civil society. We're trying to build a neutral staff here and trying to feed ourselves with your personal takes now, but also your organizational or whatever work that you're building. So with a follow-up question related to development and connectivity, we are finding that it is hard to try to understand some common ground or to identify common ground just in an audiovisual piece. But this is some informal debate that can help us to understand a little better. The rest of the region, Latin America region, for us, we can say it's the same region, not always the same challenges, but we are also facing this connectivity issue, like moving up in the priorities, also because the pandemic and all the digital transformation that is taking place. But we want to understand the challenge in the Caribbean, because we want at least for you to cover the first or two or three ideas on that. We do have a problem on meaningful connectivity, which is the bar, where the bar is set. If we have fiber to the home, if we have 4G across the territory in the continent, and then we have a lot of challenges, specific challenges with rural connectivity. So we are trying to work on that arena also from our institution. So for you, the challenges are related to competition, to market, to regulatory or institutional challenges, more related to rural connectivity. How would you send or describe a little bit more about those challenges? And also, if you have some recommendations or you can quote recommendations that you have read or at least identified in the Caribbean.
Okay, so I would say our challenge is really rural connectivity to an extent, because we do have issues in the urban area as well. We do have stabilization issues in the urban area as well. But certainly in the rural areas for remote school and other, business activities that are now having to be held remotely, that rural connectivity is the #1 issue. I don't think the answer to that is regulatory. I think it's a capacity issue. We do have a liberalized sector within Jamaica, and so we do have two main competitors in terms of internet connectivity. And I don't think the market is open from a commercial perspective to other competitors, though they are there. And we do have people who have been granted a license and who have smaller licenses who are to build out. But certainly the existing players in the market, the two big players, which I can tell you now, Flow, which is Liberty Global out of Florida, now based in Florida, and Digicel, which is of course the rest of the of Caribbean and I think some Central American countries too. Those are two major players within the Caribbean, and I think they are having issues in the larger islands, certainly in Jamaica, with rural connectivity. Fiber optic cable is where we have our main supply coming in. In fact, just one of those players is the controller of the fiber optic cable coming into the island, into the north, and so it grants a license to the other player. And there are several issues there. There is the security of the fiber optic cables, which are on land, or the cables which are on land. There are several issues which are geopolitical, well, not geopolitical, but sociopolitical in terms of our connectivity. But I do think they are lacking capacity, and the economic environment isn't perhaps conducive for them to invest in the higher grade connectivity levels. They are currently at 4G. I'm not sure if we're going to be seeing 5G anytime soon. There has been talk about it, but I'm not sure if we're going to be seeing 5G throughout the Caribbean anytime soon. I think COVID has put a pause on that. Not a superstition, but certainly just capacity-wise, COVID has put a pause on that for a while.
Right. And I want to piggyback on Grace's comment about capacity and also take a step back. So Andres, you made a very important remark just now that all of our societies are grappling with these substantive issues because of the pandemic, and that's very true. To understand the Caribbean's developmental challenges is really a question of understanding who or what the Caribbean is. I think for a lot of people outside of the Caribbean, we are still very much seen as just luxury destinations that have sun, sea, and sand. And there probably doesn't seem to have a lot more going on there from their perspective, from an outsider's perspective. What the Caribbean is, it's a collection of small island developing states and overseas European territories, which have some characteristics that will continue to affect this capacity question before us. One of them is that typically in quantifiable terms, we have very small populations. The CIS definition referred to 1.5 and below, but of course there are exceptions. Jamaica is an exception to that 1.5 million category. And even larger countries like Haiti and Domrep, which have both 11 and 12 million respectively, they're still classified as CIS. You also have a high dependency on international trade. Because the economies themselves are quite small, you would see that there's little in terms of a broad economic portfolio internally, but a lot of things are dependent on what happens on the external side, on international trade. And as a result, our countries are highly susceptible to shocks within the global financial and economic systems. We are much more susceptible and vulnerable than other countries. We have a region where we have one of the highest levels of brain drain in the world. So there was a recent OECD report that spoke to every 7 out of 10 trained people in the Caribbean, and by trained, they refer to tertiary education, migrates to an OECD country, typically North America or the UK. And that puts us above world average when it comes to brain drain. So what we do have, as a matter of fact, very limited people in general, and then limited trained and professional people to undertake tasks. And I think quite anecdotally, a lot of us are familiar with when you meet a Caribbean representative in an international meeting, that person has about 3 or 4 portfolios representing 3 or 4 different sectors. And sometimes it may seem as a shock to other players, but how is it that you're involved in academia, you work for the government, you have a private sector business, but that is just our reality in the face of a set of unknowns and simply not having the complementary pieces to do what we have to do. And we're also a region with a high level of susceptibility to natural disasters. And the fact of the matter is that when a natural disaster hits some of us, we have an economic setback of sometimes up to 10 years. The Category 5 hurricanes that came through in 2017, those would have had long-lasting effects on our capacity to develop. So besides the physical destruction, it's a real heavy destruction to the structure of things, to the economy, and it really limits what we can do in what amount of time. So there are these, what I call these conditions around the Caribbean that a lot of people are aware of. And I think that's important to note. And it really explains a bit of the difference with some of the dynamics at times when we think of Latin America and the Caribbean. Our public sector tends to be a lot more involved in the economy by virtue of there being limited players. So you will see a high level of state-owned enterprises or PPPs to try and stimulate activities where because of access to capital reasons, because of the majority of peoples in our societies not having access to generational wealth, it really impacts how much activity that can happen within our space. And those characteristics or points that I just mentioned, they are perennial. So whether or not we had a pandemic, this always sets us apart from what larger countries or the more developed countries do, because it's just very quintessential as to how we are and how we are set up within the world system.
Well, I loved that step back that you took, my friend. It was a very complex and complete explanation of the context that we are trying to understand or discuss while talking about development. We are certainly trying to, we won't say that we understand everything, but we are trying to understand that even more. And myself, I really miss to be in some of your meetings. It has been a couple of years, but we are trying to reach back and to try to understand the realities and the evolution of those realities, and try to understand, even if we are doing that like with the mics on, because we are recording the meeting and we're having the same discussion. We want to understand if there is room for regional cooperation among Latin America and the Caribbean to increase development, or a little bit, maybe in some identifying one point or identifying one agenda. For example, if you understand that rural connectivity challenges can be discussed or can be raised together with the Latin American region, or if you understand that some other cooperations could also be done in the rest of the list that we have, could also be done together with the Latin American region. And what is your take on that?
I'll leave that one to Kevon, because that's really a technical issue. I know that's his alley.
All right. Thanks a lot for that question, Andres. Raising it together with Latin American counterparts, that's indeed an interesting idea. I think one of the things that needs to be mentioned is that there needs to be levels of comparability with Caribbean context and Latin America. I think that level of comparability comes a lot from Central America as opposed to South America. So for instance, even if we were to contextualize rural connectivity challenges, they'll be quite different from our connectivity challenges in the Caribbean will be quite different from connectivity challenges in, let's say, a larger landmass like Peru or even Argentina, where there you see in very quantitative terms the differences that geography produces in that field. I think part of the issue is that Latin America and the Caribbean, we are both developing regions. So because we are both developing regions, we understand that there are needs that we have that become very apparent whenever you go to a global meeting. Let's say let me give an example. This is not an endorsement or anything of the sort, but the World Telecommunication Development Conference by the ITU, that opportunity where once every 4 years, you're able to influence the ITU's programs and basically their direction on how they will do development work across the world, right? What you see is that sometimes, or quite often, I should say, those nuances of the sea are not well seen or represented under LAC. So it's just a point to make that we have developmental needs. Both regions, Latin America and Caribbean, have developmental needs. How they may prioritize those developmental needs will be quite differently. And then how they may actually drill down and execute those developmental needs is a whole different story. So community networks, for instance, they have been a saving grace for large countries where, because of the downfall of economic competition, you will see that communities are getting together, they're getting sponsorship from another global actor, they're learning how to set up these networks from the last mile of where the economic competitor would have stopped and extend it to their particular community and know how to run it. As to whether or not those are the types of solutions that will meet what the Caribbean needs, that's still up for debate, because at the same time, we're talking about connectivity, but we're also talking about digital opportunity, insertion into the global economic, the global digital, or the global internet economy. And there is something that we have been at a completely disadvantaged level for quite a while. We still have, for the most part, region that is fully consumer, well, they consume a lot more than they produce. And it's a mentality that works against us when it comes to thinking about economic development and the like. And that sort of challenge, or that sort of difference, it ties back to other factors which are not there before time. So connectivity, you may think, well, that's just the issue with the ISPs and operators and something that needs to be solved on that end. But if we think of opportunity, we have to inevitably talk about the education sector and education opportunities that are present within the Caribbean in order to give people the right set of skills and tools to do what they should be doing on the internet. And for me, it's as if a lot of times when you come to a regional or global level, you don't have an opportunity to give that much context as to why you will find Caribbean actors asking for special considerations for their region. Because the educational challenges, the access to capital challenges, and all of these other challenges that are attendant to having meaningful access and good connectivity, those are not usually discussed at those spaces. And sometimes assumptions are made that the Caribbean has these things in place and therefore they are non-issues. And they are real issues that I won't say compete, but are part of a wider gamut of things that we have to face that may only be iterated at a point in time as just being connectivity. So it's a real complex environment. It's a complex environment that we would love others to understand as well. And my concern is that sometimes it's often minimalized or trivialized, some of those attendant issues that we have behind what may seem as a singular ICT challenge or a singular connectivity problem that we would express at a point in time.
And so we are, I don't know, maybe we can go to Grace once to take advantage of Grace's expertise. You were also quoting some public policy goals or challenges. If you want to go broader than that and to at least cover what you think is key for, also what matters are key for setting the development agenda, let's say digital like financial services or electronic transactions or net neutrality or other issues that you can maybe refer and tell us about the need for the Caribbean to settle these pieces in order to achieve a level of development.
Right, thank you. So I'm going to jump to electronic transactions and financial services, because I think that's also one, when you look on the priorities that have come out of COVID, that's one that has come to the fore. And quite a few Caribbean countries have placed electronic commerce on their agenda or pulled it up to the top of their agenda or near the top. Financial inclusion is very important, especially now, because people do not want to be handling currency, people want to be trading. And e-commerce has really, I think, taken off comparatively in the last year or two because of COVID. And to facilitate e-commerce, we need to have the digital currencies. We need to have people being banked. People aren't being banked in terms of levels of banked people who have bank accounts. Trinidad and Tobago is way ahead of the rest of the Caribbean based on the research that we've seen. Jamaica lags behind. We don't have several people being banked. We don't have people having access to even a bank account. And so we're trying to get them to use their smartphones, because people have a smartphone even though they don't have a bank account. And so we're trying to get digital currencies going. When you look throughout the Caribbean, Jamaica has now started a pilot project for digital currency, the central bank digital currency, which was mined just this week. We issued a couple million Jamaican dollars under that digital currency regime. In terms of other Caribbean countries, the Bahamas was really first out of the gates, actually, in terms of a digital assets and digital currency. So the Bahamas Central Bank has that on its agenda. The Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, which covers several of the Eastern Caribbean countries, which are the smaller countries, St. Kitts, Antigua, I believe Dominica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, those countries are covered by the ECB, Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, or rather ECCB, and they are also looking to start up their own digital currency. So with the rise of financial technology, we're looking to see more regulation around fintech. It has already started, and we're going to see more and more regulation around financial technology. The aim is to have persons who are not within the banking ecosystem get into financial technology, because it is an area that is ripe for innovation. And a lot of the younger startups are really much better at doing that sort of innovation rather than the banks. And hopefully the Caribbean can go into that direction. So e-commerce is, I think, as a matter of trade, very live for us. The laws are there for several of us. We do have an Electronic Transactions Act, and that's modeled off the UNCITRAL e-transactions laws. And so we're very similar e-transactions laws when you think about it. Despite that, we're still seeing some pushback against digital signatures. And so for us as lawyers, that's one area that we really need our e-transactions laws to accept. People are still requesting wet signatures when physical documents are no longer being used for contracts anymore. And as lawyers, that's a big pet peeve for us. Can we move to electronic signatures being recognized? And, we're getting there, but it's taking longer than it should. And that's, I think, an area in which there has been a shift in focus over the last year or two. Net neutrality, to be quite honest, has taken a back burner, and for a surprising reason too, because several of these internet companies, telecoms companies, have had to partner with particularly education companies and schools and the government to provide free access. And so while, a couple of years back, it used to be, okay, well, this is anti-competitive, this is contrary to innovation. No, we're seeing that those partnerships are saving us. They're saving people who can't afford internet, fees, internet connectivity on their own. We now have zero rated websites which allow for Google Classroom to actually take place, which allow for other educational online facilities to actually operate. And without that, we would be at sea. So in my view, net neutrality is not something which we're going to see come to the fore until COVID ends, when that happens, because that would be just, shooting us in the foot. It's just not a live topic now. We have much more and bigger priorities right now.
Yes, I fully agree exactly what Grace has said there. And certainly e-commerce is one of those things really at the fore. It's live and direct. Two cases come to mind. So Belize, less than a month ago, Belize started an omnibus legislative approach to pushing work on electronic transactions, public sector data sharing, and electronic evidence. So that was initiated in the Belizean Parliament on the 2nd of July of this year. So it's as live as that. This is what is happening. And just this week, just before this meeting, I was in a public consultation here in Trinidad and Tobago that looked at modernizing its data protection law. A few days ago, there was also a public consultation on modernizing our Electronic Transactions Act. So both data protection and electronic transactions, they were partially proclaimed acts since 2011 with a couple of hiccups in their proclamation. As Grace had mentioned, under the e-commerce rubric, there has been a bit of hesitation and aversion to recognizing signatures, which is something that should not be in this day and age, especially as we're looking at how do we conduct things while working remotely. So one of the main points of the recent consultation here in Trinidad and Tobago is to make sure that there's also some level of alignment with even another UNCITRAL instrument, which is the Model Law on Transferable Records, yes, from 2017. So it's somewhat understanding or taking advantage of this current period to do significant updates to what we have as legislation, but all within the mindset of pushing forward e-commerce and the attendant issues to that as one of the key priorities that we have right now. And I would say on the digital currencies point, I was actually very glad to read about Jamaica joining on with the Eastern Caribbean and the Bahamas with their digital currency initiative. I would say here in Trinidad and Tobago is still somewhat of a discussion per se. I haven't seen as much development on that front, but certainly I know that this country would be behind for too long on that issue. But the banked population, yes, is high, and we still are looking at different things developing from there.
Right. And just to add, I know Kevon mentioned data protection. So if you, it is something which goes hand in hand with e-commerce. And luckily for several of the Caribbean countries, just before COVID, I would say a year or two before, we had all started, partly because of GDPR, and it globally became a hot topic issue. And we'd all started to put in place at least draft laws on data protection. And so for most of us, we are far along. And I think the cybersecurity issues which have now come to the fore have brought data breach issues and notification issues. Certainly for Jamaica, we have had issues. If you've read Tech Insider over the last couple of months, you'd have seen that we got some flack for even our COVID application and our tracking there. So it has become a very, very topical issue. What do you report? To whom do you report data breaches to? So certainly the cybersecurity aspect, the notification of breaches has raised some alarm locally. And I think it's good that we do have all of these pieces of draft legislation throughout the Caribbean. Several of us are just waiting on the last shoe to fall. So we're waiting on the regulators to be put in force. I know that's the case in Trinidad. That's the case in Jamaica. We're waiting on the appointment of the actual people who will actually monitor the system, and several other jurisdictions. I was on a training session yesterday with the Bermuda and the Privacy Commission, and they spoke as well to them being on the last lap. So I think we're almost there when it comes to data protection. And I'm very happy with that. I think we've done a very good job in the Caribbean of bringing our standards up to a world standard, which, let's face it, has been GDPR. And that's what we've been following, the European standard. And, I think that just goes to show that we can do it on several other fronts. Yeah.
And Grace, just to that point, I think it's really a testament to the paradigm shift that has happened with our mindset. Simply because I remember over a decade ago, when you spoke about enabling legislation and the enabling environment, people just used that as a cliche, as a buzzword, without understanding what enabling meant, because we have been so used to developing laws just to sanction, that the idea that you want to have these pieces of legislation in place to boost trust and confidence with digital activities, that was still somewhat removed. And probably, I say this a lot on recorded things like this, one of the benefits of the pandemic has been that we no longer have that luxury of questioning or wondering what it is. We are living it right now, where it's no longer a subsequent series of activities. We are doing a lot more activity online now. And as by default, we have to treat with the environment to make sure that people can continue doing those activities in a trusted and safe environment. And that if something were to occur, that justice can be served for those sort of incidents. And those some things could be, for instance, ransomware attacks. I mean, there's no secret that ransomware has skyrocketed since the pandemic. I think last year it was reported that it was, I think, 300% more ransoms were paid just last year compared to any other time in history. So it's one of the things, it's like we now have the truck rolling, it's rolling, and we are fixing the tire at the same time, but at least we're moving in a direction which I think is very positive.
Agreed. This is a future that we were building for, and it came much faster than we expected. Yeah.
I believe it was really great, and you were starting reacting to each other in the last part of the conversation. So I believe we are set. We had a little very interesting and productive session, and we hope to learn better how to understand the Caribbean, how to approach the Caribbean challenges. And thanks for this very first edition in English, and also related to a specific region. It was a pleasure for us.
Totally. Yeah, thank you very much, Kevon and Grace. It was really, really great to have you today. The points that you addressed need some urgent attention. So we hope this small space gets to help to contribute to the debate that need to be addressed by the whole community. So it has been a privilege for us, for the EDD LAC, to have you today. It was really a pleasure, and thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.